The television, an invention that has forever changed our society and world at large. But for an invention that has been so impactful on society, its origins are relatively unclear. The first electronic television was patented in part by a Russian inventor, Vladimir Zworykin, in 1923, though he could not get his television to function properly until 1934. Another inventor, Philo Taylor Farnsworth, showed the first television signal transmission in 1927 using a scanning tube. For many years, the two fought over patent rights, with Farnsworth eventually winning in courts. Despite the complicated history of the television invention, its influence on society is indisputable. It was received differently from the radio, which, as described by Britannica, was seen as a technological wonder and not a medium of cultural significance. In the early days, few people had full television sets in their homes, but it became a community event when people would gather in front of televisions, in store windows, or in bars to catch important events including sports games and relevant current events. After just a decade, historians report that televisions have become a greater influence on culture in America than parents, churches, schools, and government combined. Interestingly, in its early days, despite its great influence on society, television was not revered with great respect. As a new medium, its programming did not have the high production standards. Additionally, many of the best actors and actresses were already occupied with the more popular forms of art, including Broadway and formal plays, so the best talent was not on TV. This, combined with relatively low budgeting in early days, made television programming quite mediocre, a far cry from the intricate, expensive, and long-standing productions we see every day on television now. Regardless of opinions of quality, however, the impact of television on daily life was tangible and almost immediate. It was originally called the radio with pictures, which was fitting considering its role in American family life when it emerged. At this time, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had made communication directly accessible to the American people through his radioed fireside chats between 1933 and 1944. As soon as he left office, television was on the rise. Between 1947 and 1955, households equipped with televisions rose from 1 to 65%. All of a sudden, Americans could not only listen to the president and other government officials update the public, but they could also see it. The first State of the Union address to be broadcast on television was Harry S. Truman's in 1947. Since then, television has become an important medium with which the government can communicate with the American people. In times of emergency, the government will interrupt broadcasting to communicate with the country. The evening after the 9/11 attacks, President George Bush addressed the country on television and broadcast to the country a message of support and strength, and to the entire international community a warning that the United States would come back stronger. A powerful message made easily accessible to American people and the world through broadcasting. Of course, however, with the advent of the television came a government agency to regulate it. The Federal Communications Commission was established in 1934 with the purpose of regulating all interstate communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. It is directed by 5 commissioned officers appointed by the President and confirmed by Congress. The Commission largely gives cable operators the freedom to broadcast whatever they please. The Communication Act ensures that the FCC cannot censor broadcast material as it would interfere with the freedom of speech. The principle is there in the FCC words, to ensure that the most diverse and opposing opinions will be expressed, even though some may be highly offensive. It is important to note that the FCC does not have enforcement power in certain cases. For example, while indecent material cannot be banned entirely, it can be restricted, especially to protect children potentially in the audience. Thus, the FCC prohibits the broadcasting of indecent and profane material between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., when children are most likely to be watching. Smoking was commonplace in the United States and countries across the world for the majority of the 20th century. But following a U.S. Surgeon General report in 1964, the country was enlightened to the dangers of cigarette smoking. Major advertising for cigarette smoking took place on television, so the Federal Trade Commission suggested that cigarette advertising be banned completely. With free speech and censorship arguments, it was first difficult to push through. In 1967, the FCC decided that based on the fairness doctrine, anti-smoking PSAs should be aired on television along with the tobacco company's ads. This agreement lasted until the year 1971, when Congress was able to pass a law banning all cigarette advertisement on television. With information about the country's dealings more readily available to the people with the advent of television, political opinions became much more established and strong. For example, the Vietnam War was a controversial conflict in American history, in part because it was one of the first wars covered extensively on television. Some politicians believe that this is to blame for the turn in public opinion. The striking images of war and the aftermath that rolled to the American people every night on the news were certainly impactful. Politicians themselves, however, soon learned how to use the television as a medium to help further their own narratives and shift public opinion toward their cause. A prime example of this was the Daisy ad, ran by President Lyndon B. Johnson in his 1964 election. The ad featured a little girl picking daisies right before a nuclear bomb explodes in her field. The ad made many people wary of Senator Barry Goldwater, afraid that he might actually use nuclear weapons. Although the Republicans complained that the Democrats were using terror on television to advance their cause, over the years these type of fear ads have become commonplace in American political campaigns. Similarly, while news broadcasts started off with the intention of being completely factual and informative, it did not take long for bias to creep in both subtle and overt ways. In 1970, Vice President Spiro Agnew called news commentators nattering nabobs of negativism, while attacking them for their biased interpretations of events. He was especially frustrated by the instant analysis that news networks conducted of presidential speeches and statements. This practice that he hated so much is today a very important part of televised news. Networks pay people generously for the sole purpose of being political commentators on their shows. Political commentators Gore Vidal and William Buckley paved the way in the late 60s for the modern day Ann Coulter and Angela Rye. Television has changed American culture, politics, and society forever. The technological advancements we make in the media continue to influence the way we as Americans engage with one another and the world as a whole.